Hello and welcome to the Parrish Art Museum. My name is Corinne Erni. I'm the Senior Curator of Arts Reach and Special Projects at the museum, and it is a distinct pleasure today to be speaking with Sam Pollard. He is the Director of Black Art in the Absence of Light. Sam, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today for a conversation about the film.
My pleasure, Corinne. Thank you for having me.
Sam, the film is sort of based and inspired by an exhibition by David Driskell in 1976 at LACMA, which was entitled Two Centuries of Black American Art. And it was really a groundbreaking exhibition at the time. Can you tell us a little bit what inspired you to make a film today to celebrate Black artists, looking back at the time when David did this exhibition and what has happened in the meantime? And I also just want to mention, to me, it's kind of significant that the film comes out at a time when there is another significant exhibition of Black artists by the late Okwe Enwezor at the New Museum, which has just opened now. So yeah, I just wanted to ask you what your inspiration was for the film and what do you think has changed since 1976 and what hasn't changed?
I was hired by HBO to develop this film and produce and direct this film, and one of our major consultants was Thelma Golden, and Skip Gates is one of the executive producers with Jackie Glover. And so initially, Skip and I had thought that we should build a film around Jackie's Black Male exhibit from 1994 that was at the Whitney. And we approached Thelma about doing that, and she felt that that was sort of narrow, and she thought we should think of another way to do it. And she was the one who thought of the idea that I should talk to David Driskell, who had been a curator and a historian and an artist in his own right in curating the exhibit at LACMA, So I reached out to David in January of 2019. He had an apartment in Manhattan. I went to visit him one evening. We had a lovely dinner. And during that dinner, he told me about, the genesis of the project, and the tensions and the issues they had to confront with the people at the museum and finding the right artists to present in the exhibit. And so after I had that dinner with him, I felt that we could really then use, the exhibit and what he was doing as a frame to tell the story about African-American artists back then and up to the present. So the idea was to use 2 centuries of Black American art as the frame and then talk to contemporary artists who may have seen the exhibit or read the catalog and talk about the inspiration that the exhibit had meant to them as artists. So that led us to reaching out to Kerry James Marshall, Amy Sherald, Betty Saar, Jordan Castile, Carol Walker, Carrie Mae Weems.
Yeah, all wonderful artists.
Wonderful artists.
Right,
and,
right.
And yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry. So when one walks through Chelsea nowadays, you can see a lot of these amazing artists in major galleries. I mean, Jack Whitten just had a show at House and Beard, Nina Chanel Abney at Jack Shaman, Derek Forger at Petzo, Wangechi Mutu at the Met. So obviously things have changed. And I just wanted to ask you, what do you think were some of the key moments or key events that helped make these changes and what is still holding it back?
Well, I think what's really been a major sort of epiphany for the American art scene, from my perspective, is that they've really recognized that many of these wonderful African American artists in the film and those who are outside who didn't make the film, like David Hammonds and others, have really had something to really say about what it means to be an American and what it means to be an artist, an African American artist in the American scene, the art scene. And I just think that in understanding the importance of the diversity of this country, it's clear that the galleries now and the gallery owners are really understand that it's important to representation. It's not just the artists that I grew up and saw in museums like the Picassos and the Van Goghs, but it should include some of these very important African and African American artists. So I think it's changed, but listen, here's my more cynical perspective. There's always peaks and valleys. So right now, the last few years, there's been this, as you said, this, some say sort of this renaissance toward, presenting the work of African American artists. But the question is, will it really take hold and sustain itself so these artists can still be, front and center in the next 10, 15 years? Or will it go back down where all of a sudden you won't hear these names, you won't see their work, and they'll disappear for another 15 years and then come back? I mean, America goes in waves, like lots of things. So, I'm cynical enough to believe that it may not hold like it's holding now.
That might be very true, Sam, but there are some major efforts also from within the institutions, and I think that's probably an important point, that there are changes within museums and within cultural institutions. Just yesterday, I received an email from the Association of Art Museum Curators that they just founded a professional alliance for curators of color around the world. I know that many museums are now, really looking to diversify the staff and as well as the leadership and the board. And I think that is probably a very important change that needs to happen, because as you mentioned in your film, 85% of the artists shown right now in museums are still white, 15% of the artists are of color, and only just over 1% are Black artists. So there's obviously still a huge amount of work that needs to be done.
As David Driskell says at the end of the film, which, in some ways is sad, we said we still have a long way to go, and hopefully there'll be, as you just presented, there'll be significant changes, because, you look at these board of directors at these institutions, and the majority of the board are white people, so, I mean, you're right, the diversity and inclusion has to increase if there's going to be significant change in the art world.
Absolutely. I wanted to talk a little bit about the significance of the Studio Museum in Harlem, and also that notion of community and a sense of a place where Black artists can be amongst themselves, can exchange ideas, can look at each other's work, and getting a kind of recognition within their community, but then also being pushed into the mainstream, which is certainly what has happened, with Mary Schmidt Campbell and now Thelma Golden, really sort of, if you will, raising a generation of Black artists. And what do you think is the significance of places like the Studio Museum in Harlem for Black artists?
Well, here's a personal perspective. When I was 14, 15, when did the Studio Museum open? In the 70s, right? I guess
I
it
think
opened
in 69.
69.
Yeah.
When I was a young man in my early 20s, one of the places I went to visit when I was young was the Studio Museum, because for me, it was an opportunity to see the work of African American artists, artists of color. So to me, it was like, as a person who wasn't a painter or a ceramicist or anything, it was a young, evolving young film editor. It was a great place to go. And I think for many of us in the community at the time, it was a special, special place to be able to see our people's work up on those walls. So to me, it's extremely significant. And it's only has grown in stature, since that time. So that's why it's such an important place, not only for the community, but for young artists like Jordan Castillo, like Sanford Biggers.
She talks about that in the film.
Like Sanford Biggers, like Kerry James Marshall, like Allison Sarr. They all were able to have their fellowships and be there to sort of, meet other artists, to really exchange ideas and to have dialogues and talks and see each other's work. So it's really grown in stature, and it's an important institution that, under the guidance and leadership of Thelma, has just become even more significant in the last 10, 12 years.
Absolutely. And I wanted to talk a little bit about perception. Obviously, not only did we have a first Black American president, but we had also two Black artists who did their portraits, Amy Sherald and Kehinde Wiley. And how do you think the perception can start to change once we not only see a Black president, but we see the representation of a Black president by Black artists? So kind of like what is the importance of who is telling the story?
The importance of who's telling the story is always necessary, in this world. I mean, the idea that Michelle and Barack realized that an African American artist was the ones who create those portraits is a milestone, and they want them to be uniquely different than those that we've seen before of Franklin Delano Roosevelt or Bill Clinton or Teddy Roosevelt or Herbert Hoover, which they did, and I think that's invaluable for people to see that they understood that in terms of who they are and how they should be represented, it had to be an African American artist to do that. The other thing that's significant about that, and this is the significance of the presidency of Barack Obama and Michelle Obama being the first lady, it gave young African American children and young people of color of all ages to see that you can achieve anything just by looking at who this man and this lady was in the White House. So that's very important too. But it's always a challenge in terms of how our stories are presented. And one of the things I was taught as a young filmmaker was that, if I'm to have any kind of impact, I should be able to help tell our stories. And that's what I think Barack and Michelle understood. That's why they had Kahinde and Amy do those portraits.
Right. And there's something that struck me in the film that actually Bernard Lumpkin said about Amy Sherald and the gaze of her characters. They have sort of that very sort of fixating gaze. And she talks then about how, she's sort of reversing that notion of the gaze, whereas in the past, Black people had to avert the white gaze because it could turn into confrontation and violence. And I think that also tells something about, empowerment, owning the gaze and owning, having that kind of ownership. And as a filmmaker, I'm sure for you, the gaze is very important too. And I guess that ties a little bit into who's telling the story or who's controlling the story.
Well, absolutely does. I mean, I think if you go and you really sort of analyze the gaze that comes from Amy Sherald's work, or the gaze that you see in Kahinde's portraits, or the gaze that you see in Jordan Castillo's work, you see that the people that they're presenting in their work have a sense of confidence, a sense of, this is who I am and accept me. And they're able to direct that to you the way these painters have put them up there in their portraits. So it's, it's very important. And for me as a filmmaker, I feel that same sort of responsibility that when I'm telling a story, if it's about Black artists, or if it's about Sammy Davis Jr., or if it's about Martin Luther King, I want to make sure that my presentation of it takes into effect, the responsibility I have to present them in a way that the audience can say, oh, because someone said to me recently about my MLK FBI. Oh no, someone said to me about this Black art film recently. Michelle Wallace, Faith's daughter. She said I could tell it was a Black director make that film. Now that made me feel good. Not that I completely avoided to that, but the fact that she felt that. And watching that film, that she could tell it was a Black perspective and point of view, made me say, maybe I do maybe people can see that and feel that.
Did you say why she could tell that?
Who knows? I don't know. She didn't tell me why.
So that brings me.
It was a nice comment, though. It was a nice comment.
Definitely a nice comment. Compliment. I wanted to ask you something about what Theaster Gates says at the end, which really struck me, which is very profound. He says that, obviously Black artists have always been working. We just haven't been seen. And that's why, the whole notion of shedding light on the work. But he says, we will continue to work. But he also says, until he owns the light, until we own the light, he wants to keep working. He'd rather work in darkness. And I thought that was incredibly powerful. And, knowing this coming from Theaster, who definitely owns the light, I think, with what he's been doing in Chicago with the Rebuild Foundation, I think that's very powerful. What does that mean exactly? I mean, or what more could there be? What else needs to be done?
Well, Swiss says it too. They're
Yeah.
both basically saying this, that
Right.
as artists, we should be able to own our own galleries, have our own museums, have our own places to present our work. You know, we shouldn't have to just rely on the regular institutions. We should create our own institutions, and that's what Theaster is all about in Chicago. That's exactly what he does, and that's what he's talking about. If we're able to say we have an ownership in how our work is presented, you know, where we want our work to be seen, that will empower us even more. And that's exactly what he means. So the Swiss says the same thing, you know, and that's what he
Exactly.
means by owning the light. That's exactly what he's talking about.
Right. And Hank Willis Thomas also mentions how important it is to have Black patrons like Swiss
That's
and
right.
like Alicia Keys who invest in Black
Into the
art.
art. That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. And also, I wanted to address something that Valerie Cassell said about, well, yes, there are more exhibitions now with Black artists, but it doesn't necessarily translate into acquisitions into the collection of museums. And again, I guess there it takes leadership to change that. And I just wanted to ask you if you've seen some changes in museums happening.
I haven't, but maybe you have. I haven't seen any. I mean,
Well,
I think
I'm trying to be a part of that. I mean, I have been showing Black artists that then I was able to get to be acquired into the collection of the Parrish. I showed Bartoli
that's good.
Togo in 2018, and this summer I'm featuring Tomashi Jackson with a newly commissioned work. And so I'm definitely hoping to acquire the work for the collection of the Parrish.
Well, you're doing it, Corinne. That's what's got
Thank
to be
you,
done.
Sam. Well, I hope you'll come out. You'll be our special guest for sure.
Well, sure. When we're all able to travel more, sure, I'll come.
Absolutely. Where are you right now, Sam, actually?
I live in the Village in New York City.
Wonderful.
Yeah, but you're on Long Island, right? Aren't you on Long Island?
I'm in Long Island. I'm in
Yeah,
Southampton right now.
yeah.
Exactly. Um, I also wanted to ask you about, going back to this notion of owning the light, the importance of historically Black colleges and universities, because that's sort of maybe also where it all kind of started. And what is their importance
Well,
nowadays?
if you think back, you're absolutely right. You know, when Mr. Driskell was going to school, he went to Howard University, and that's where he was introduced to art, you know, and the history of art. And he had professors who were not only teachers, but they were also artists. And you think of Howard University, you think of Fisk, you think of Morehouse, you think of Spelman. You know, they've all were responsible in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s in helping these Black artists like Charles Austin, you know, and Augusta Savage and others have a place that their work could be seen and shown before, you know, during the times of segregation. So the HBCUs are vitally important, have been vitally important in shepherding and supporting and housing many of these wonderful Black artists in their work.
Right. And they also have museums and exhibition spaces. So
That's
that's
right.
important. Yeah, absolutely. Sam, I just wanted to ask you a question, and I know that's a difficult question for filmmakers or curators about the selection of the artists. Who made it into your film? I mean, I love all of those artists. I think they're amazing. There are many other amazing artists that didn't make it into your film. So um, I just wanted to ask you what was the criteria for your selection?
They had to all pay me $100 to get in the film.
That's it.
No, listen, we came up with a list of artists, some whose work I admired, some who I know, like Carrie Mae Weems. I know her personally. I love her work. And and we reached out to a lot of people. Some people turned us down, I won't even name some names, but some people turned us down. We asked for a couple of people who are very hot now, and they said no. They said they weren't available. They didn't have time. And
Surprising.
yeah, but it happens. And so, we we've shot more artists than's even in the cut. I mean, I did some stuff with MacArthur Benyon. I did some stuff. We shot Mary Lovelace O'Neill. But you know what happens when you're creating a film? Some people become stronger in their presentation and how they come across on the screen than others. So it's always, you never listen. From my experience making films, you can never satisfy everybody. So you have to at some point go with your gut instincts and say, okay, these are the ones I like. Some people turn me down, but these are the ones I think work. I'll be frank with you, Corinne. There were some who I really treasured. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Radcliffe, so I wanted to get Radcliffe more than anything. Kerry James Marshall, I think he's a phenomenal artist.
Right.
I thought Kara Walker, one of the reasons I selected Kara Walker is because she's so controversial within the Black
I thought that was
community.
interesting too, and it's important also to show that Black culture is not a monolith. It's
it's not a monolith. She's controversial, so I love that. Yeah. We selected Fred Wilson because I found his work so eclectic. His whole approach to art is so eclectic that I find it very unusual.
It's wonderful how he approaches collections of museums.
Yeah, that's amazing to me.
Yeah.
And Jordan Castile, I loved her energy. I love her youthfulness. I love her passion about her work. So that was a real reason to select her. Now, Alison Saw we shot too, but she didn't fit in the film. And Betty, Betty Saw is a wonderful artist, but she was really difficult for me.
Was she? Well, that was interesting. I mean,
that's called age. That's called age.
Yeah.
But she's wonderful. She's fabulous, So,
She absolutely is. And it was nice to see Faith Ringgold, and also her talking about how she was excluded from Spyro. I mean, that was interesting,
Because and I've always been a big fan of Faith's work. And for her to be so open and frank about how Romeo and them treated her, I thought you had to have that in the film. That sexism, back in the 60s, so
absolutely.
She was absolutely important. But, there's some people, listen, if I had to go back and do in all honesty, Corinne, it should have been probably a 3-part series. It should have been a multi-part series. Then you could have had David Hammonds, you could have had Mark Bradford, you could have had a whole bunch of other people in it,
Well, maybe it will become a series.
I don't know. From your ears to HBO's from your mouth to HBO's ears.
That would be wonderful, actually.
Yeah.
Well, Sam, do you have any last thoughts? What is your hope for a takeaway for the audiences?
This is the hope. And I always hope this. I hope that when people watch the film, it inspires them and challenges them to want to visit museums or go on the internet and learn about these wonderful artists and the artists who influenced them. I mean, it would be fantastic for people to go back and say, oh, who's this woman, Elizabeth Catlett? Let me learn about her. Who's this person, Charles Austin? Let me learn about him. Who's Norman Lewis? Wow, I want to learn about him. Who's Augustus Savage? I mean, it's an opportunity. Selma Burke. It's an opportunity for people to do homework, to learn about the history of this art and these artists. That's what I always hope these films do. They challenges open people's brains to want to be curious and learn.
I think that's definitely what your film is doing, and it's wonderful that it's on HBO, and we're so proud that we are premiering this in a theater.
That's great. That's really great. Yeah.
So I want to thank you so much, Sam, for...
My pleasure. My pleasure, Corinne. Where are you originally from, Corinne?
I'm from Switzerland.
Switzerland, okay.
Yes, so I had to learn a lot when I came to this country.
I probably did.
I certainly did. Yeah, but I read a lot, James Baldwin and Toni Morrison, and just to inform myself. Yeah.
Good. Cool.
Yeah.
All right.
All right, Sam. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Be good.
Bye.